And I welcome everybody to the audience. We have one item on the agenda for this workshop, non-bargaining compensation / classification. Stephanie will be leading us in a presentation. The task force or representatives of the task force are in the audience, and we will be utilizing them during Stephanie's presentation to field questions, but that would be their limited participation at this moment in time. So if you do have questions, we can address that at the proper time. And let's see. I saw that we have Rob, we got Joel, we got Victoria, we got Eric, we got Kathleen, we got Indra, and we've got Rick, who is actually going to sit in the audience during the presentation for a little bit because he was involved in the task force immensely, which is absolutely fine. Seth seems to be the only one absent. We have a quorum, so I will hand the podium over to, or the mic over to Stephanie to get started.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. As we get started today, I want to note what's been handed out at your places. It's the same things for the most, well, it's essentially the same things that you were provided via email, just in hard copy. So there's a copy of the slides, the different salary schedules that were distributed. There was a slight change made to the option. There was a request by a council member to break it down by department, and so they're now in order by department and grade, so lowest to highest grade within each department. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to find things on those option implementation sheets for you. So I do want to start off, as I've done with many of the last presentations, acknowledging that I do have a conflict of interest, as my position is one of the non-bargaining positions. That being said, my role here is to present you with options and risks, receive direction, and provide legal parameters. I will proceed however council directs, so it is council's decision, not mine in any way. There are, and give me just a moment. There are two other things, and I know I've mentioned these before as well, that full implementation was already previously included in the current budget. So the funding is there for these adjustments. It wouldn't require any additional budget work. And second, we are talking about market and equity adjustments in order to be able to obtain or recruit and retain quality employees and comply with legal requirements. These are not merit increases like an annual step increase would be. And it's not a matter of whether any individual employee deserves a raise for their work. It's a question of whether the position is paid competitively and whether employee placement is consistent with their experience. And some of these slides you will have seen during our last presentation, just a little bit of a refresh since it's been a month since our last discussion. We're talking about an updated approach to adjusting the non-bargaining employee compensation and classification based on market analysis and Oregon pay equity law, and that would support council's goal of fiscal stability by balancing financial health and long-term sustainability with the need to recruit and retain quality employees and comply with the law. Where we're going to go with this today, we'll talk about background and status. Again, some of that will be repetitive. We're going to readdress some of those known pain points just so we're all on the same page, talk about what our goal is. As requested at our last workshop, we'll go over what those the March and May proposal and the October proposals look like, so you can kind of see where some of those numbers have changed. But again, remember that that's kind of comparing apples to oranges at this point. There are significant differences in how those numbers were arrived at. We're going to talk about the direction that council provided at our last workshop, as well as the subsequent task force recommendation, the assumptions and methodologies that went into what's before you today. We'll talk about the baseline and some options, some of those options that council requested and the task force recommended. And then at the end, we'll have you provide staff direction on where to go next. So again, this started in 2024. In October of 2024, when we received Dr. McGrath's market analysis report, that her report focused on positions and grouping comparable positions, bringing the wages for those positions into alignment with market, addressing internal compression. One thing I do want to note is that at the dais with you today, you have some additional information that was provided over the weekend or this morning. It was some comparables that was done by the Daily Courier as far as wage rates, as well as some information we received from the chair of the task force in response to some of that information. So that goes along with any discussion you might want to have about market rates. Dr. McGrath did not place employees on the grid, though she did note that the most budget-friendly option was to place employees on the grid at the closest step to current wages without a decrease. Of note is that she did not review employees in those positions for pay equity compliance, and that's where we ran into some pretty significant issues in implementing the way the consultant had recommended, because if we had done that, there would have been some problems for the city. Again, note that the report is now more than a year old and the data is likely about a year and a half old, so probably from summer of 2024. The definitions we're working with, market means the external competitors in comparable jurisdictions. So those are cities in Oregon by population as well as cities throughout Southern Oregon. Compression is the internal comparison where a lower track or subordinate position makes close to or more than a higher or supervisory position, and that's only looking at base wages. We're not talking about any additional compensations like overtime or incentives. When we're talking about that, that makes it a much more complicated analysis. For the numbers we talk about here are strictly base wage. And then pay equity, which is the legal requirement that more experienced employees cannot make less base pay than a less experienced employee in a comparable position. So again, Dr. McGrath looked at the first two, but not pay equity. And a lot of times there's been some confusion about compression and mixing compression up with pay equity. Those are not the same. Compression on its own is not a pay equity concern. Subordinates can, under certain circumstances, make more than their supervisors, and that often happens where long-term subordinates report to a newer supervisor or where overtime's involved. But what we've seen through the analysis over the last couple of months is that compression can indirectly lead to pay equity issues when a subordinate promotes and because the wage scales are so close that they start at the higher end of the next up salary schedule, so regardless of their experience. That results in less experienced people making more than more experienced people. And if you're talking about also laterals, you bring laterals into that and you end up with discrepancies. So then you have pay equity. So by itself it's not, but it can cause it down the road. Current status, there's 49 non-bargaining employees, 3 vacant non-bargaining positions. 24 of those employees have been with the city more than 10 years and 17 have been more than 15 years. So we have about half the employees have some pretty significant longevity with the city. And as a reminder, council did approve a 3.02% cost of living adjustment to the current salary schedule and made that retroactive to July 1st. That has been implemented. We are still working on those adjustments. To some extent, any additional pay equity adjustments depend on how council proceeds with placement methodology, because that's going to determine how we compare positions. So we haven't made a final determination on all those adjustments because we don't have that guidance yet. I believe, as I noted before, in 2025, the overall turnover was about 10%. That's on the high end of turnover, but it's not unacceptable. But we did see that many of the non-bargaining that left did cite better pay elsewhere. We also have anecdotal examples of internal employees not applying for higher positions because it would result in less pay, and external candidates declining job offers due to pay. And I know at our last workshop, the chiefs mentioned that there's positions that are unfilled or unlikely to be posted or filled in the near future because we need to get this resolved in order to be able to properly recruit. And again, even with these steps that we've taken, we do still have some known pain points. I took out the information that occurred prior to, for anything before the first of the year. As of right now, sergeant detectives have a base pay range that is essentially the same as a lieutenant. So a sergeant detective at step 8 or higher could not receive the 5% pay increase if they promoted to lieutenant, and a step 7 sergeant detective would promote to a lieutenant step 10. Again, that's a promotion, recruitment, and retention issue, as well as a pay equity risk. Similarly, with the battalion chiefs to deputy chiefs, the salary schedules, the step 1 of the base pay is fairly similar. It's about $1,500 difference. The only reason there's a significant difference in the top of the pay range is because the battalion chiefs are on a 6-step schedule and the deputy chiefs are on a 10-step schedule. So right now, a battalion chief step 6 would promote to a deputy chief step 10. Office assistant to office assistant confidential. Again, this is the one where the office assistant makes more. Again, it's a 7-step grid, but their step 1 pay is higher than the office assistant confidential. Of note, too, is that this position is entering into bargaining in the coming year, so we're going to be seeing their request here in the near future as well. So that position is likely going to have an increased pay. An office assistant step 7 currently would promote to office assistant step 10, or office assistant confidential step 10. We see it also with the communications supervisor to 911 manager, and these are both non-bargaining positions. We have a communications supervisor step 10 would promote to a 911 manager step 9. We have the associate planner to senior planner, again, 7-step to 10-step grid, but we have an associate planner at step 7 promoting to a senior planner step 6. And one of the things to keep in mind, we heard this from the labor attorney, is anytime you have somebody promoting to the upper half of your grid without any guarantee of their experience, you're likely going to be seeing pay equity risks because they may or may not have the correct experience to support that. So you, ideally, in an ideal system, you want to have promotions happening anywhere from up to 1 to 3 or 4 is where you usually would see placements. So when you have a step 6 or higher, then you have some concerns about promotion, recruitment, retention, and pay equity. The last pain point that we've talked about is the unresolvable pay equity issues that exist in our current system. We have a consultant's report that says certain positions are comparable. We have not been able to find any clear bona fide factors to distinguish those positions from each other, and they're currently on different bands, which results in more experienced employees making less money at step 10, and there's no ability to increase their pay on the current salary schedule within their step grade. One of the pieces of information that council requested be brought back at the last workshop was the cost of a pay equity violation. This is information that we received previously, that it would usually be 2 years of back wages, so whatever they should have been paid, that additional, we would have to pay that. Compensatory damages, the courts have been awarding 1 to 2 times the amount of back wages and compensatory damages. Punitive damages if the city engaged in fraud, malice, or a willful and wanton violation of the law. Attorney fees and costs, both for the city attorneys and employees' attorneys. Liquidated damages, also equal to the unpaid wages. Penalties, the notes say 8 hours a day at a standard rate of pay for up to 30 days. And then our coverage with CIS may or may not cover any or all of a claim. There is a $10,000 deductible per claim and a limit of $50,000 per year per member, not per claim. So no matter how many claims you have, it only goes up to $50,000. And there's also an all-member cap of $500,000. So if other jurisdictions are having similar claims, there could be no money left for the city to have claims covered. So just to keep in mind what the costs might be. Our goal with this is to obtain the most cost-effective salary schedule adjustment and implementation that will allow for recruitment and retention of qualified employees and ensure compliance with the legal requirements. So the additional information that was requested last time, for some context, in March and May of 2025, I believe actually also earlier than that, I think there were the executive sessions in February as well. The presentation included the consultant's salary schedule, and that's one of the documents you have in front of you. Placement of employees on that salary schedule below their current step based on the number of years with the city or in their position. And it did include a longevity incentive and a 3% cost of living for each fiscal year after that. And this was the data that was provided as far as budget numbers for that proposal. So this did include the 2 new positions that we have now added. There's a number of reasons why this isn't very comparable to the options that you're going to be reviewing today. So we do have the 2 new positions that were added, the GIS supervisor and the water distribution supervisor. We have seen a number of resignations, new hires, promotions, so turnover and changes within the non-bargaining unit since this was developed. We do have the 3% cost of living adjustment to the existing grid, and that impacts where some employees could have been placed on the new schedule, because now that they make more as their base rate, that can impact where they could be placed using the consultant's method. The 2026 CPIU that's being used is 2.71%, not 3%, so a little bit of a difference there. This projection includes the longevity incentive, and the direction from council was to not include that. And the placement methodology is significantly different. We've talked about that before, that we're using a more objective placement methodology. So again, for recruitment and retention, the proposal that was done almost a year ago was the closest to market at the time of presentation. There would be minimal retention issues anticipated if that would have been adopted. It does address the compression issues, because the market study and the salary schedule were designed to address that internal compression, but it did not adequately address pay equity. That was one of those, I think we've talked about it a couple of times, where we found a number of areas where we would have had to make some significant adjustments. This would have been a high-risk proposal given the pay equity issues that we have learned a lot about over the last 6 months. It also would have been a fairly high cost given how high employees were placed, but there would have been high reward in that we would have retained and been able to recruit high-quality employees. Jumping forward, after several discussions, council established the non-bargaining task force to provide a recommendation for proceeding. And the task force recommended modifying the consultant's salary schedule from 4% between all steps to 4% up to step 6 and 2% between steps after that. They recommended a retroactive effective date of July 1st, and that the 2025 CPIU be applied to the salary schedule pre-placement to adjust the grid to reflect the market. The consultant's recommendation at this point was based on data that was about a year old. They also recommended an experience-based rubric for the placement of employees, and this rubric would be used for hiring employees in the future, as well as for placing existing employees on the new salary schedule, and doing this minimizes our pay equity concerns. So the task force's recommendation at that point was to use their modified salary schedule, that COLA, and to include a longevity incentive as well. And the 5-year projection we received at that time is as follows. And note that this is change from current. It's not total cost. So it was a little bit different presentation of numbers. It did include no inflation to benefits, even though historically there are regular increases, because that's just not something that we could project. And it did include pay equity freezes for certain employees in the first 3 years. It also assumed all positions were filled. So this one was somewhat more comparable to the options that are being presented today, but there are still some key differences to keep in mind before we get into those. So it is close to market, but the top of the range has been reduced. There would be minimal retention issues anticipated. It does resolve the compression and legal compliance concerns. It's a lower risk, higher cost, high reward proposal compared to some of the others we'll look at. But the differences are that the fiscal year 25-26 COLA was applied to the existing that the fiscal year 25-26 COLA that we applied to the existing current salary schedule results in employees in higher placements in today's options and longer periods of freezes. Because of when you bump an employee's pay using the consultant's methodology, they end up higher on the pay scale than the rubric would otherwise place them. The projections include these projections from October do include the longevity incentive, and again, council has indicated that was not what they wanted to do. And again, we've had resignations, new hires, and promotions, plus the 2 new positions added since the development of this proposal. So there are some variables that we can adjust in developing the new non-bargaining structure. And these are the ones that we can play with today if you want to. We've made some, the options before you use these. The first is with the salary schedule. You can decide whether to use the consultant schedule or the task force schedule. We can even, if you have any desire, make modifications, but as of right now, the ones before you are consultant and task force. You can decide whether to apply the 2025 3.02% cost of living to the salary schedule before employees are placed. I will tell you that what that does is it results in employees being placed at a lower step. It reduces the number of freezes and the impact that the cost of living adjustment we had earlier this year made. So it actually brings people down on that pay grid. So you do have in front of you, there are 6 different salary schedules before you. The top blue corner will tell you which one you're looking at. So you should have the current salary schedule, the consultant salary schedule without COLA and with COLA, the task force salary schedule without COLA and with COLA, and then one called regraded. And we'll talk about that when we get to option 3. But just to make sure that you are aware of which ones you're looking at. You have, there's an effective date. This is when the new structure takes effect. The longer that this is delayed, the longer we will have risks. That is the one variable we won't be able to manipulate today, mostly because I didn't have the opportunity to do the coding required for that one. But everything else we should be able to modify as you see fit. Phased implementation, whether to put a cap on how much of a market adjustment an individual employee can receive within a fiscal year, how we want to structure that. And then finally, placement methodology. What weight should experience be given and how should that be used to determine placement? So a month ago, council's direction was the task force salary schedule, although you perhaps wanted to compare that to the consultant schedule, so we can do that if you'd like. 3.02% pre-placement COLA effective January of 2026. We're using January 11th, 2026 as the start date for this because that is the first day of the first full pay period of the year. So it makes it a little bit easier for to know what the pay rates are going to be. You wanted to revisit phased implementation based on data, so that's one of the things we'll do today. And you indicated that you did not want to consider longevity incentive, vacation cap, accrual rate adjustments, or personal holiday adjustments, so we're not going to talk about those. You also then directed that the task force should be consulted for an updated recommendation, which took place on January 2nd of this year. They reviewed the estimated financials and adjusted the earlier recommendation. So they are still recommending the task force salary schedule. They're recommending no fiscal year 26 COLA, the 3.02% pre-placement. They do recommend that council do the 2.71% COLA for fiscal year 26-27, which would take effect July 1st. That the system take effect January 11th of this year, so retroactive. A phased implementation with a 10% market adjustment cap per fiscal year. And we'll talk about what that looks like when we get to the options. No longevity incentive and the weighted experience placement methodology. So I took those and based on the assumptions we'll talk about, that's how we developed the options that you'll see, those between council's direction and the task force. Again, the assumptions are the effective date of January 11th, that the COLA for fiscal year 26-27 would be 2.71%, that the subsequent fiscal years would be 3%. That's an estimate. We don't know what those will be. We can use 0, we can use 3%, we can do a range, but those are the numbers that we've been using as just an average of 3%. It assumes no inflation to benefits, even though historically there have been regular increases. Those are things like medical and dental insurance. So benefits will likely be a higher cost, but we just can't project what that would be. It assumes all positions are filled with no turnover, and we all know that's not going to happen. The city's around 10% turnover, so we will have vacancies, we will have promotions, we will have new hires. But for purposes of projections, we're leaving everything stagnant for the next 5 years. It assumes satisfactory performance evaluations resulting in step increases on annual review dates. That is usually what happens. There are reasons why it may not, but it's fair to assume that it will happen. And then current employees would be placed as though they were new hires based on their experience. And that placement, what you have before you is based on a weighted methodology of 1 point per year for City of Grant's past experience doing these same duties. So doing their exact same job, how long have they been doing it? You get 1 point. 0.75 points per year for the same duties with another entity, because there's a learning curve. There is, when you come from outside, even if you're doing technically the exact same job, there's always room for growth. You need to figure out how it really works within the city's system, things like that. So it's not exactly the same, even if it has mostly the same duties. And then 0.5 point per year for substantially similar duties, whether it's internal or external. Every 3 points would be 1 step higher for placement. The only adjustments or exceptions here is if the experience placement would result in a reduction in pay from current city wages, then you have to be placed at the step closest to your current pay without taking a pay cut. If the experience placement would result in an employee with the same or more experience as another employee in a comparable position making less money, so if we have any pay equity adjustments, we would need to make those. And then we would need to redline if the result is inconsistent with the experience placement until initial placement equals experience placement plus annual reviews. So that's where we talked about the impact of that 3% COLA to the current grid results in employees being placed even higher under the consultant's methodology. And if the rubric has them placed lower because of their experience, they would have to sit at that step until they had reached enough annual reviews to be at the step they were actually placed at. So this is one area that's up for discussion. So it is the placement methodology at the 1 point, 0.75 points, and 0.5 points per year is a little bit problematic for current employees without the pre-placement COLA being applied to the grid. It results in some pretty significant long-term freezes for employees and a relatively high number of employees being frozen. So alternative weighting is one of the things that we may take a look at here shortly. The baseline that we're talking about, when you see comparison to baseline, this is a true baseline. This means no adjustment to the salary schedule and no COLAs, period. It's not necessarily apples to apples with the options we're going to talk about, but it's everything remains status quo with the exception of employees getting their step increases. It does, at least in my mind, it artificially inflates the difference between the baseline and the options because it's unlikely that council is going to say 0 cost of living adjustment for the next 5 years. That doesn't, unless we want to continue to fall further and further behind with market. So it doesn't make sense to me, but that is a true baseline. And I do have the alternatives as we go through our options. I do have the options compared to baseline with the COLA added. So that 2.71% is for 26-27 and the 3% thereafter. I have the comparisons for that and I'll hand those out. So if we were to stay at baseline and make no changes, we will fall further behind in the market. We will have significant increase to compression, and we already have subordinates making more in base wages. And recruitment and retention will suffer. There would be no pain point resolution, and in fact, our pain points would likely be exacerbated. It would be low cost, but it would also be low reward and high risk. So with that, and I think as we discussed last time, some kind of change likely needs to occur, and that's up to council to determine whether and what that change looks like. Option 1 before you is the task force recommendation. As you note from the top, the salary schedule is the task force schedule without the cost of living adjustment pre-placement, effective January 11th, with the 2.71% COLA for fiscal year 26-27, and then phased implementation with 10% market adjustment cap and weighted placement. So if you look at your the options implementation sheet that you have before you, the top section notes the variables and assumptions that were applied to get the results. So you can always see what the numbers are based on. And then your placements down below tell you the current step and salary for that position, the placement step and salary based on the variables, what the amount and rate of increase would be, whether or not there would be a phase in if that were to be implemented. And so the placement is the step they would actually be placed at, and then the phase in is how many steps they have to then take in order to get to where they should be placed based on the rubric methodology. The last column in there is grid shift, and that's just a reminder of when the consultant did her work, she determined that these positions, that was the amount that the original schedule needed to move in order to be consistent with the market at that time, so a year and a half ago. It's the consultant's grid and compared to the original salary schedule. So you'll note from the option 1, you have a number of phase-ins identified. These phase-ins, what it comes out to is the employees would receive up to 2 steps per fiscal year at the beginning of the fiscal year in order to make that catch up. So if they only had 1 or 2 steps to go, the first phase-in is when they would be complete with their phase. More than that, it would take an additional year in order to get the phases complete. So they would still get their step increases, still get cost of living, but they would be capped on July 1st of every year at receiving no more than 2 steps to try to move them closer to where they should be for the market and experience. So these are the numbers provided by finance if the task force recommendation were to be implemented. I highlighted the total cost to the city and general fund cost to the city. So the top is the budget estimate, and that's the total cost for the 5 fiscal years. And then the bottom section is the budget impact. So that's how much over baseline we would be looking at for total and general fund. And you have the handout I just provided would show you what the difference is if we were talking about the baseline plus COLA comparison. Option 1 is better aligned with market, although it is likely going to start off the new system behind market because there's no pre-placement fiscal year 25-26 COLA. There would likely be some retention issues due to placement and the adjustments, the freezes in particular, where we've heard that there will likely be some turnover. It better resolves pain points, but there would be a little bit less work done on the compression due to the lack of fiscal year 25-26 COLA. So they would be a little bit closer together than they would otherwise be. It is low cost, low risk, but also low reward because it would have some impact on recruitment and retention. Option 2 in front of you, the variables included were the task force salary schedule, 3.02% pre-placement COLA, January 1st or January 11th effective date, and then the COLAs as assumed. It does not have a phase-in. We're referring to this one as the full implementation. So if you just said, let's just get this done, we can move forward with it. The full implementation budget estimates are on the next slide. It has a total cost to the city over the 5 years, general fund cost of the city, and then the differences between the baselines. One thing to look at that I thought was interesting with this is the fiscal year 29-30 budget impact compared from option 1 compared to option 2 is significantly higher. The task force recommendation with that phased approach and the lack of COLA says it would be, the total would be about 3 million in addition to what the baseline would have been. And with the option 2, it's just under 2.4 million. So that's a pretty significant difference. And the reason behind that is the phase-ins and the freezes. So when they take effect. With the full implementation without the phase-in, it spreads those costs over the years. It evens them out a little smoother. When you have the phase-ins and the freezes, you get bigger jumps because all of a sudden you have to come up with more as opposed to easing it in a little bit more. For recruitment and retention, this is the most market competitive and would be the best for the retention. It would resolve pain points, but it is low risk, but it is higher cost and high reward. The third option that I was asked to provide is what's the bare minimum to fix the legal concerns. And we're calling this the restructuring of the current schedule. And what this would do is take our current salary schedule and move positions that are grouped by the consultant together. It would make them on our current schedule grouped together now instead of being on separate wage bands. We would use the band for whatever the grouping is, whichever position's on the highest band, we would group all the employees onto that band. It's only a small Band-Aid. It would resolve the otherwise unresolvable pay equity issues, but it does not address compression, it does not address market, and there's a chance that it will cause other parts of the system to break. This one, your budget estimate and budget impact are on the next slide. So we'd be looking at a total cost of the city of about 2.8 million over what baseline would be. For recruitment and retention, the schedule would be significantly below market for most positions. Does not adjust positions that do not have comparators. So it puts some lower responsibility positions at higher grades than higher responsibility positions because it doesn't address the system as a whole. Does not resolve compression, but it does resolve those legal compliance issues. So it's low reward, low cost, low risk. And then the last one that I was asked to bring information back on is public safety only. So what if we only did the police and fire schedules and leave the other non-bargaining positions on the current schedule? This would use the task force salary, the pre-placement COLA, no phase-in. And for public safety only, your budget estimate and budget impacts are on that next slide. So this would make it market competitive for police and fire, but not the other non-bargaining positions, and we would anticipate retention and recruitment issues for other non-bargaining if this were to be implemented. It does resolve pain points for police and fire, but not for any other non-bargaining position, and it does not resolve the legal compliance concerns that we have. It would be kind of somewhere in the middle of a medium cost, medium reward, medium risk. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. We have options for staff direction. I can tell you that if you want to look at options, I have the spreadsheet here and we can adjust variables if if you want to see what implementation would look like with different things. The one I think we had I mentioned before is we can change the experience weighting, and that would make it a little bit easier for placement to remain comparable to what the consultant's placement methodology would result in.
We got questions for Stephanie, I guess Kathleen?
Yeah, Stephanie, I just want to ask you about, so when you're saying for police and fire only, does that mean that they're not included in the restructuring current schedule?
So the public safety only means, so we have technically 3 non-bargaining salary schedules currently. We have the executive management confidential, the police, and the fire. They're 3 separate schedules. If you only adjusted the police schedule and the fire schedule to the new system, but not the other grid, is what public safety only would mean.
Right, I understand that, but are they not included in these others?
No, they all are.
schedules? Yeah.
All the other ones include everybody. This just would separate out public safety to stand on its own.
Okay, because the totals for the general fund are higher with public safety only, like looking at option 3. That doesn't make sense to me. It seems like it would be lower.
So public safety only.
It's like 23 from the general fund, cost to this city. And then the option 3, restructuring current schedule, is 22. So it seems like if it was public safety only, it'd be less.
From general fund? General fund is, JC, general fund, public safety primarily falls in general fund, correct? Only?
Yes,
So-
I realize that, but a lot of the others do too.
No, I think there's only 4 other positions in the city that are in the general fund and non-bargaining. That would be 2 senior planners, park superintendent, and the park supervisor. Everyone else is out of the general fund.
Further questions? I've got Rob.
Yeah, following up on Kathleen's question, because I'm not sure that I understand the answer. If we look at, just for instance, option 1, and we get the, from slide 29, and we get down to total cost, and the hit on the general fund there is 1.966 million, right? Then we going back to Schedule 4, or option 4, and we have the hit on the general fund there is 2.16 million. So that's actually a greater hit if it's just public safety only, but they're close. And there may be I'm sure there's a really simple answer for this, but I don't see it. I don't understand it right away. The total cost on public safety only is 3.5 million, whereas the total cost on the other is 6.7 million. So the general fund hit is really close on both of those, but the total cost is quite different. So I just don't, at the spur of the moment, I don't understand why that would be. Is that a question?
That has to do with the variables that were selected. The difference between option 1 and option 4 is option 1 has does not have the 3.02% COLA. Option 4 does. So that pre-placement COLA would impact things. Same thing with the phase in. Option 1 would phase in, option 4 would not. That's why I included at the top of the implementation the variables, because those do play a role.
I guess I didn't make my question clear enough. So why is it that the total costs on option 1 are, approaching double what the total cost for option 4 is, whereas the general fund hit is actually more on the police and fire only? So one of them is almost double, It just seems very inconsistent. I don't comprehend that at all.
Option one is all employees. Most of the non-public safety employees are going to fall outside the general fund. So that's
Okay.
why you're going to see your total cost being significantly higher. But it doesn't include that 3%
Okay.
cost of living adjustment, and it does the phase-in. So that's why your general fund employees are primarily your public safety. So that's going to stay fairly similar when compared to
Okay.
the total.
Thank you. I understand. So basically, because most of the rest of the employees you're saying are falling outside of the general fund.
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any further questions from council? Eric?
All right, everybody noticed that we've got the Daily Courier from Vicki Aldris, her input on here. My question is whether or not the task force or anyone else had a chance to look these over, these numbers. They seem, I guess the point that is being made is that these numbers are a little higher than what the task force had put in place, than their recommendations. So my question is there going to be a chance to revisit these numbers? Because obviously I can't confirm these numbers aside from doing our own research and or the city or the task force doing their research. So my question is, I guess then, have these numbers been looked at by the task force, and are they being considered?
The short answer is no. I received them this morning. I also received an email, which you also have in front of you, from Tom Bradbeer from the task force. Those two items are connected. That's the only information that we have. There's been no verification of anything. But what we do know is that the consultant's information provided us with what was market based on her experience, and that she used a methodology that included making sure we were dealing with comparable positions, as well as making sure we were dealing with all the comparable cities and jurisdictions. I know that her list of comparables was higher, so I'm not sure how that plays into it, but it's two differing sets of numbers. One is the consultant, the experienced consultant that we retained to provide us with data.
Further questions? I got Rick.
I want to elaborate a little bit further on that. I did not go and verify Vicki's figures, but I used her figures to do a comparison of where option one would put each person that was listed in her review. Position one would mean if there were 7 cities listed or 5 or whatever, 1 would be the top position, and 5 or 7 would be at the bottom. So the city manager pegged in at 7 out of 8, the fire chief 5 of 5, the city attorney 5 of 7, HR director 5 of 6, public works 3 of 7, community development 4 of 7, police chief 4 of 7, and the finance director 5 of 7. So what this indicates, when you look at the median, based on option 1, they come in below the median. Does that help?
Who comes below specifically?
Well, like, if you look at the city manager, if there's 8 positions, and the median would be 4, he came in at 7, so he would be on the bottom half of those salaries listed.
Is this talking about specifically the Daily Courier email?
Yes, in relating it to option 1.
Okay,
Do you want me to explain the methodology?
please.
Okay, so the Courier listed the range for each city from a low to a high. So what I did is I pegged what the average would be between those two, and that became the reference point for that city. and then to do that for all 5 or 7 or how many cities are listed, and then to take option 1 and compare that proposed salary to each individual city. And then you would, so if the salary coming in is based on fitting into the slot closest to the existing cities out there, I'm not sure I'm explaining it right. So if the salary proposed is on the low end of the scale, then if you have 5 cities, they would probably end up with a 5 out of the 5 cities because they're not being paid in the middle, they're being paid at the bottom end of that range.
So is it, is what was said on the, by Vicky correct, that the task force then rated everybody a little bit higher than normal?
If you're using option 1 and you do the comparatives that Vicky has, no, we actually are, but it turns out we're on the lower side. We're not on the high side.
Is that across the board or just for a certain few?
Just in general, like, as I said, again, 7 out of 8, so that'd be low. 5 of 5 would be at the bottom. 5 of 7 would be on the bottom side. 5 of 6. 3 of 7, that would be basically the middle. 4 of 7, again, on the bottom, half. 4 of 7, and 5 of 7. Okay, thank you. I hope I explained it. Okay,
Eric, do you have the Courier page?
which,
This one.
yes. That's, the current page is what I did the calculations from. Again, I did not do a spreadsheet, and I did not do, I rounded it off to thousands. I didn't do the dollar cents. So these are approximate figures.
Any further questions from council? Got Indra?
Yes, Stephanie, thank you. You've stepped in and done a ton of work on this stuff. You mentioned turnover 10%. I just know, when you're looking at salaries for employees, it's helpful to know where that turnover occurs, and I'm not, what positions. Can we get more, or did the task force get detailed information on the turnover? And can we get that information?
I guess that depends on what you mean by detailed information. We can provide you with some information, but not a lot of details. So what information are you looking for as far as
I'd
turnover
like to
goes?
know where it's occurring, specifically which, departments, positions, where that turnover is occurring, and how the length of time probably that the people have been in that position, and so we can see how often certain positions might be turning over more than others. That would be helpful to me. And then you mentioned freezing, some would be frozen for a long time. Can you give an estimate of length? What's a long time? 2 years, 10 years? What's a long time?
There was at least one that was more than 4.
Years?
Yep, more than.
And several, 3, and
Many
a bunch
are
1, or how?
The majority of them would be 1 to 2, some 3, a few for 4 or more.
Could we get information on that?
I'll have to look into that one. It wouldn't be detailed. I could give you counts,
detailed,
but
okay.
we'd be looking at a significant number of freezes.
Just a general, I would like to see that.
I believe, at least with the, give me a second here. With the task force, With the task force proposal, the option 1, it would result in more than 20 for employees being frozen for 1 or more years.
Do you have the other options?
I do. I can
That
look those up.
info? It goes up, did you say?
Yep, if you give me a moment, I'll look those up.
Oh, okay.
Did you want to add to this question line, or do you have another question? Okay, Joel, go ahead.
Andrea, I think that was a good question. So 10% of 50, approximately 50
We may need to
positions.
pause on a question while she's looking that up. I'm not sure if the multitasking would be appropriate at the moment.
Yeah, I would be glad to, Aaron.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so option 2 would be 14.
Stephanie, could you put the microphone closer to you? Thank you.
Yep, option 2 would be 14. Option 3 would be 0 because it would simply be regrading. We're not talking about placement. And I don't have a count on option 4. JC, was that in my? I sent JC very detailed things on how to code his work. We didn't have freezes on 4 either? Okay. Option 4 would not include freezes.
Okay. I just had one more question, and if Joel, did you want to go first? I have one
think
more
he would-
different
Well, I was
question.
just responding to your question on the 10%. That would be 5 positions out of 50 people. I know personally of 3, 2 in 1 position, the city forester. We've lost 2 of them. They both went to larger cities, though. They weren't comparable cities that had a larger, more responsibility and more wages. And then our housing specialist also went to a larger city that was not a comparable city. It was a much larger city with a much larger responsibility where they got paid more.
Go ahead, continue, Andrea.
Just one more. So you mentioned it in this briefly presentation, and we talked about it earlier. So the liabilities we had, the active ones were taken care of, correct? Is that?
Yes and no. We've made some progress on that. I believe I've noted that with our current, where do I have it on here? That adjustments are in progress where required. We've made some. There are some that cannot be remedied within our current structure. That's one of our known pain points. And there are a couple that we're waiting to find out from council what the placement methodology would look like, or if we're going to have to figure out what an appropriate outcome is going to be, because they're close enough that depending on how placement would happen is whether or not there's actually a pay equity concern or not. So until we have that guidance, we're not able to fully resolve those.
Okay, so assuming we resolve how we are currently, we resolve those issues, keeping everything the same. Is it, and I don't know government versus, private is more what I'm familiar with, but can you, assuming turnover isn't high or a problem, but there are some positions, and I see that are low, like very low. And it's probably, it could be someone in certain positions are happy with what they're making and stay here long-term. But it could be that some positions, they leave and the turnover's high, which is why I'm interested in that. And it's very hard to recruit because you can't recruit at what you're offering. And so is it possible to do position, not position by position? So for instance, if you were to leave us and we look and say, wow, we're not getting anyone, we should increase that step for the city attorney. Just that one. Is that okay to do? Or no, you have to do all of them at one time?
You don't have to do all of them at one time, but it is strongly recommended, because if you don't, you risk breaking other things and causing future pay equity issues. At least this way, we can evaluate what the impacts would be and where everything fits together, because it's a system. And that's one of the things that we've learned over the last year, is that all of the salaries within the city are to some extent interrelated when we have to evaluate them. We've learned what the impact of the bargaining units has on non-bargaining when it comes to compression and pay equity. And so if you start doing one piece here, one piece there, you can throw everything else out of whack unintentionally, unless you're able to do analysis like this every time you want to sit down and adjust a position. That's why that option 3, restructuring the current schedule, all this would do is fix the otherwise unresolvable pay equity issues, but there's problems because it would potentially cause other issues where we have people making less than they should be in comparison. Even though it's not technically a legal violation, it's still problematic, and the system as a whole suffers for it. And you're going to likely end up with compression and market issues. So you can adjust one at a time. It's not recommended because it's a systemic problem that we have.
Would you say that any positions are kind of standalone positions, or no? Because
you've got what the consultant said based on her experience of which positions are comparable, which positions should be grouped. There's a number that are on their own band, and those are kind of standalones, but there's others that are in some pretty tight groupings with multiple different positions that are comparable. So that's how I would group them, is based on the consultant.
And the compression's only going to happen when you have someone supervising someone else. If you have people, the lower end non-supervising will never have compression issues.
It's not necessarily
Right?
supervision as much as like progression tracks. So just because you're higher on the progression track doesn't necessarily mean you're supervising that lower track, but it does mean that you're less likely to get to want to promote to that next step up in the track. So I think office assistant and office assistant confidential are an example of that, where you would usually go from office assistant to confidential, but right now office assistant standalone makes it more than office assistant confidential at step 1. So there's no supervision relationship, but it's a compression issue.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I got Victoria and then Kathleen. Victoria?
Yeah, I want to go back to this email that is addressed to Rob, Stephanie, and Aaron from Mr. Brad Beer, and it's to Papa Pels, and Stephanie and Aaron. I'm just wanting to understand, and I don't know who can answer this for me, why this email is here. Was this supposed to challenge option 1 or any of the options? I'm just not certain why this is being presented to us and what significance it is, so I'd like to get a little bit more information about that, and perhaps someone who's on the task force might be able to say it, or maybe someone who this email was addressed to can say something about that, because I'm just not clear about this.
It was an email that I received this morning, and it related to the data that was provided by the Daily Courier, so not any one of the options that are being presented by staff today. It was good information, and it probably said it better than I would have said it myself, so we decided to just include the email for your review as a response to that data. I don't know if any of the others
Yeah, it
had.
did come from the task force member and we wanted to make sure council as a whole had all the same information. So that's why you're being provided to that. And I'm guessing if you have a question about that correspondence, we do have Tom available here in the audience, and he was part of the task force. You could probably ask him questions.
Yeah, Sheriff, it's appropriate if he can just come up and give us some background on information on this whole reasoning for this email. And maybe if there were previous emails, that would be interesting to know as well.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm glad to respond to the email that I sent. First, as a member of the task force, I feel some responsibility to communicate in response to emails that I receive and to make sure that I'm presenting the information in the way that the task force received it, in the way that the consultant presented it, and based on the analysis of the city attorney. So it was an attempt on my part to clarify the issues of comparing salary data between cities. When I send an email like that, I fully expect it's going to be public information. There was no intent on my part to somehow conceal or limit who would see that information. I'm glad to respond to any questions you have about it. I stand by what I wrote. I don't think there's any need to revise it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I wasn't trying to insinuate you were trying to hide anything. I just, it feels like there was maybe an email that came before this, or I guess I don't understand why, this was being sent. Okay, thank you. I do appreciate it. Also, I appreciate you going over all the information. Maybe I just wonder why, did you feel that this information might interfere with the work of the task force at all? And so you wanted to make sure to give more information? I guess that's more of my question.
Whether it would interfere with the task force work or not was not really on my mind. I wanted to make sure that decision makers had the information that we as a task force received. And when we get information about comparative communities, I think it's important that we put that in the context of the 19 communities that were surveyed by the McGrath study. 19 communities that include the ones that were included by the Courier survey, but many of them are higher than the regional salaries and others are lower. And so it's important to look at all of them together, not just a selected few. That was my only point.
That's kind of what I was feeling, so I just kind of wanted to bring it up and flesh that out a little bit to see if what I was thinking was, and it sounds like it is, so I thank you very much for that.
There are 19 communities in the original survey, and not all of them had exactly the same position. And so as a professional HR consultant, McGrath looked at that data and applied it to Grants Pass based on her best professional judgment. And I think the task force as a whole recognized the value of her work and incorporated it into our recommendations. And we are in favor of option number 1 from the task force.
Thank you so much.
Do you have a question for Tom?
I do.
Go ahead, Indra. And then Kathleen, sorry.
Was that, for Tom, was that a unanimous vote for option 1? All the members agreed to that?
I believe it was.
Okay.
And we have Byron and Warren here. They can speak for themselves.
Okay. So for you, because you pointed out the Public Works, and in your email, you talked about Medford, they don't do as much. Does Roseburg and Klamath and Ashland, do they do the same job about as what ours does?
Well, That's the kind of question that McGrath asked during her survey. She sent a detailed questionnaire to all of the communities and asked for them to include the job description for each of the positions. We did not go back and review all of that in detail, but there were a few that we learned about in the process of analyzing this, and so I shared with you what we have learned about the Director of Public Works position, the Fire Chief position, that have significant differences, particularly compared to Medford.
Right. Medford's quite a bit larger than we are,
Indeed.
right? And so
Indeed.
that's why I was asking about, because the high end is much higher, and so I was confused about that. So you're not sure, you just went from what McGrath said about
We did not
Roseburg,
examine in detail
Ashland?
the job description for all of these positions in all 19 communities. No, we did not.
Okay.
I can say that we truly are a full-service city, where we don't have authorities like some communities do that provide services. For instance, you mentioned Roseburg. Roseburg is not a full-service city. They do have some water responsibility, but they're not responsible for wastewater treatment. They have RUSA, Roseburg Urban Sanitary Authority, and that is an independent authority/district that takes on that responsibility. So that's one item that the Public Works Director for Roseburg does not have, and that is just one example.
Gordon or Byron, it was unanimous, am I right?
Gordon Langenbeck. I'd just like to give you a philosophy of what we did. Number one, the city paid $18,000 for McGrath. We thought she did an excellent job, so our fundamental basis was to take the McGrath study. Then what we tried to look at is, how do we make this as cheap or effective for the city? So what did we do? We took the steps and we went from step 6 to step 9, 2% rather than 4. Then we said, let's phase this thing in over 3 years. So we tried to balance what are competitive salaries, and then how can we do that at the least cost to the city. So that's our philosophy, okay?
All right, I had Kathleen with the question, and then Rob, looks like. Kathleen?
Yeah, I wanted to ask how it would work. We've already granted a COLA, and that's already been implemented.
Correct.
It looks like. So what if we chose one where there's no COLA?
So-
Can that be reversible? I mean, how much work is that, or complications?
So essentially, the two have little to do with each other at this point. The cost of living adjustment that you granted retroactive to July 1st impacts only the current salary schedule. What that means is that since July 1st, employees have been making a little bit more. It doesn't have anything to do with the market study salary schedule that's coming out. So that is based on data that's old. If you want that to remain in closer to the market, you would adjust that salary schedule by that same 3.02%. What that would do is mean people would be placed a little bit lower on it because they're making more money now. And so they would be placed higher on the consultants, using the consultant's methodology, they'd be placed higher on that, the new salary schedule without the cost of living adjustment as opposed to with it.
And that all goes into effect on the 11th?
If that's what council chooses for an effective date. That's the number that we used for this purpose. You can, based on looking at the budget estimates, things like that, you can get an idea of what the numbers would look like if you used a different date.
Any further questions? I have Rob.
Yeah, so we heard Tom say that McGrath based her study on 19 other cities. Do we have a list of those cities? Do we ever get a list of those cities?
You previously received the raw data, and I can pull that up.
But was there a list of the 19 cities?
It's in that data, I can find it.
Right. And when we talked about like some of the differences between, say, Public Works Director responsibilities in Grants Pass versus other cities, you know, there apparently there are differences, but it seemed as though, I could be wrong, but it seemed as though the differences that were illuminated to us essentially were making it appear as if any additional responsibilities that the Grants Pass director would have were illuminated, but not some of the other things that other public works directors might be doing that the Grants Pass director is not doing. Like, for instance, in public works, if I'm not mistaken, the Medford Public Works Director is also in charge of a regional treatment plant that has multiple jurisdictions throughout Jackson County. And I don't know that the task force was necessarily made aware of that. It may not have made a difference. But my point is, I guess, is that there are things that are different for sure. There are differences. In some cases, the Grants Pass department heads are taking additional responsibilities compared to the other jurisdictions. In other cases, some of the department directors in other jurisdictions have more responsibilities than the Grants Pass. Now, that wasn't really, in other words, it's not a one-sided thing. It's not like people in Grants Pass are doing more, the directors here are doing more than the others in every case, because in some of the cases, the directors in other cities have additional responsibilities that the Grants Pass directors don't have. So let's just be clear about that, Tom, okay? As far as, and there's other things I could point to in that regard. As far as, I know, I guess I don't have any more, well, actually I have some questions for Stephanie. So, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure that we're clear on this. So when you had examples of known pain points, and you had examples of, and there were multiple examples where a level 7, like office assistant, would end up, if they wanted to step up to office assistant confidential, they'd go from a 7 on a 7-step grid, they would have to go to a 10 on a 10-step grid. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess the question I have is, on the one hand, my understanding is that the steps were based on bona fides. They were based on absolute, hard realities as far as what responsibilities they've had in the past, where they've come from, other jobs they've done, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if someone has not ever done the office assistant confidential position, and a better example would be one of the other pain points, but if someone had never done that, I'm not sure how they could possibly get immediately to step 10 if they've never had those responsibilities before.
Because a promotion can't result in a pay cut.
Okay, so thank you. And that's my point, is that the steps are, on the one hand, they are supposedly based on bona fides, mm-hmm. right? And as far as experience and expertise on the job, but then in a certain sense, almost arbitrarily, they can be based on just the fact that it makes it convenient for our particular compensation system. So, we're told that the steps are based on bona fide criteria and someone's expertise, and maybe expertise or experience they've had in other jurisdictions if they're a lateral change. But it also could be based on, arbitrarily, the fact that it just makes it easy for us to fit into our system. So, it just seems like we're told one thing, that the steps are based on bona fide criteria, but then we're also, if I'm not mistaken, also told that sometimes we just throw them in there just because,
Well, it's not just because, it's because we have to, in order to promote people, you have to be able to give them a pay increase. And that's internal only, and that's, I believe, city policy. So
Right, so the steps, I guess, are not always just based on bona fide criteria and experience or expertise on the job.
It's a presumption. There are always reasons why you can deviate from a presumption. It's not a hard, fast absolute. It's just, we presume you start here unless there's a reason to deviate from that, whether it's due to the policy of the city of giving the pay increase to when you promote, or whether it's pay equity law that requires us to deviate, or whether there's other bona fide criteria that aren't reflected in the rubric that should be used to assess one person's placement or not. So there's reasons why you can deviate, and it's just a presumption.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Stephanie? I got Victoria and then Indra. Victoria?
My question is for the council members, task force members. Could you maybe give us a, like, top 1 to 3 reasons why option 1 was your choice? And also, along with that, why this new information, I think Rick talked a little bit about that, but why you would still prefer option number 1 over any of the new information that was given here, including, it seems, some accusations that there are some funny, numbers happening. I don't know that that is true, but you would probably know better than any of us since you were on the task force. So what would be 3 reasons why you would choose 1, and why you believe there aren't, if you do believe this, so this is both, I guess, to Seth and Rick, that you feel confident about the numbers that were given to you? And if that doesn't make sense, then you can ask me to repeat.
So Victoria, you're asking, a couple questions here, option 1, but you said also, are we comfortable with the numbers? Which, the numbers I just stated in the positions, or?
No, just the numbers that you use to come to option 1. There's been some talk up here even today and in the past that the numbers are wrong, that you're just not getting the right numbers, that it's all wrong, and so I don't know if you can speak to that.
I guess I'd like Tom Bradbeer to speak on that, but basically I think we have a moving target here, and again, we've been discussing this for over a year, so those numbers do keep changing. Tom, would you like to elaborate?
Again, thank you for the opportunity to respond. Yes, we have confidence in the data from the consultant. I have not heard questioning of that data in any meaningful way. I did a quick comparison of a few of the cities in the Courier survey compared to the consultant's data, and they are the same. But there is a different set of comparator municipalities. When you're looking at 19 versus 5 or 6 or 7, that's going to make a difference in the outcome. And so from the standpoint of the task force, I think all of us would agree that the data from the consultant is reliable and as accurate as it can be given the date when it was developed, which was back in the summer of '24.
And I do have the answer to your question about the comparables that were used by the consultant. I found 18, and I might have missed one when I was doing a quick review. It was Ashland, Lake Oswego, Corvallis, Kaiser, Klamath Falls, McMinnville, Roseburg, Central Point, Medford, Tigard, Tualatin, Woodburn, Albany, Oregon City, Redmond, Jackson County, Springfield, and the Medford Water Commission are some of the comparators that she pulled data from.
All right. Further question?
Well,
You still have a line of questioning?
I don't think Seth had the opportunity to respond if he wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Tom. I think that, I think the data is accurate. Again, I think it's just what you do with the data, right? Ultimately, council can decide to pick their own data if they really wanted to. I think for option 1, the phased implementation and trying to bring the cost down, as much as we could was kind of the reasoning for that. But in that last council workshop when we talked about this, I mean, I was the one who originally said, we could potentially just look at public safety as an option, just for cost's sake. But again, I think the data is accurate. It just, it's just what we end up doing with that data.
Thank you.
All right, I got Indra, Rob, and then Joel. So Indra?
Yes, I'm just following up on Rob's question earlier with the placement methodology. That point system seems complicated. Where did that come about? Is that something other municipalities use, or did we develop that internally?
It's a fairly common way to assess placement. I believe that the state uses 2 years of experience equals one step. We went a little bit more in depth with ours because when we did it that way, where we did same or substantially similar experience, we ended up with some results that didn't pass the eye test, where we had people that had some pretty similar experience in another jurisdiction that were suddenly being placed higher with a year or two of experience in their current position. They were being placed higher than somebody with 10 or more years in their current position, and that didn't seem quite right. And so we talked to the labor attorney about what about if we weighted those, the different types of experience. So if it's the same, it's worth more than if it's just similar. And she said that, yes, that would be an acceptable way to approach it. And when we applied those metrics to our employees, we ended up with something that looked a little bit more fair as far as who was placed where in comparison to each other.
All right, I have further questions. Rob and then Joel. Rob?
I wanted to try to answer or maybe respond to Victoria's question. First I want to say that I think that the task force did a very good job. There's no maybe about that. Given what you were asked to do and the limitations that you were given, you did the job that council asked you to do, for sure. But I'd also like to comment that when Tom talks about the consultant bringing in and looking at 19 different cities, and the data that we focused on yesterday, that I should say that the courier that Vicki Aldis sent us that focused only on 7 cities, I actually believe that focusing on 7 cities and not the 19 is actually a feature, not a bug, because we always, every time council has ever, so I guess I'm answering the question of, there was some accusation that maybe the figures weren't accurate or they didn't apply or there was some funny business. To me, the fact that it went to 19 different cities, while Tom feels that that's an attribute, I feel that that's actually a negative. And the reason I feel that is that every time any bargaining group has come, anytime we've gone into executive session, discussed union bargaining, every single time the council is always disappointed when we find out that from a union perspective and from a arbitrator's perspective, we have to look at, we'll say 5 up and 5 down, 5 next smallest cities, 5 next largest cities, regardless of where they are in the state, regardless of what their median income is, regardless of what their housing price is, regardless of their cost of living, we have to look at 19 different cities, or many different cities that don't apply to us. Whereas Vicki Aldis's focus was on the cities that council always wants to focus on. And we've always asked, every time we go into a union bargaining, can't we just focus on Roseburg, Ashland, Klamath, Central Point, et cetera, because they are most like us. And that, to me, is where the difference is. We're not focusing on cities that are all over the state. We're not focusing necessarily on employees that might want to live in Portland or Salem or McMinnville. We're focusing on potentially recruiting or retaining employees that want to live in Southern Oregon. So to me, again, looking at Vicki's list of 7 cities and the fact that those dollar amounts are less than what the task force final recommendation was, it's focusing on what people are actually paid in Southern Oregon with a couple of other cities that we kind of know about, we've heard about, Lake Oswego, which turns out isn't that high. So reducing the number of cities to, again, I don't know that we're competing against employees that, again, want to live in urban places, high-density places. We would be competing for employees that would want to live in Southern Oregon. So again, I think that reducing that number to the number that council always wants to look at, or typically in other bargaining situations, is actually a positive. And I think that can bring us to a place of greater accuracy than the task force did by using numbers that came from all over the state in places that a lot of us wouldn't want to live.
Further questions? I got Joel, and then Victoria, and then Rick. Joel?
You know, mine's on a different subject question, so I'm going to pass it just for the sake of continuity.
Okay, next I got Victoria, and then Rick. Victoria?
So I really appreciate, Rick, that you took those numbers and that you compared them to the task force and their work. And I wonder if you might just repeat how those lined up, because it seemed like the task force, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it was average or lower, if I'm understanding it correctly. If you could repeat that for me, if you don't mind.
What I did is I took the courier list and then took option 1 and compared the median that was in the courier list to the actual that's listed for the proposed salary on option 1. Does that make sense?
Well, they're not actually there.
And then your determination from that.
So the determination, again, if there were 7 cities, you listed, the mechanism is you list the amount
I mean, I was going off the bottom.
for each city that was the average amount on the salary range. And then the higher salary, of course, is at the top, and the lowest one's at the bottom. And in actuality, those numbers can be all over the board. And sometimes there's a higher proportion that are on the top side, or there's a higher proportion that's on the bottom side. So that's why statistically you use the word median. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. And you,
We're in agreement here. I just
Okay.
wanted it to be repeated.
all right, so do I keep going or you?
If you don't mind.
Okay. So I used, to do the comparative, option 1 on the placement and looked at the ladder that's created with the comparative cities. And that's how I came with the position the proposed placement would be. Do you need further elaboration? or is
Yes, so I think you were explaining to people that overall, it's your median that you got to was from higher.
that higher?
Okay,
Correct.
and, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I got, did you have a question, Rick, or were you just statement?
Yes, I did have a question. So, Stephanie, I know when we're preparing all of this for a document for approval and to be, nothing's ironclad, but defensible, do we have the option of choosing which cities we want to have in our list, or are we governed by some rule or something as which ones we can and cannot?
So my understanding, and I haven't, and if it's been a while since I looked at this, is that for union negotiations, you are restricted. You have certain sets that you have to look at, and from there, that's how they make determinations. For non-bargaining, you don't. But the caution I would give on that is that if you focus only on a few for non-bargaining and a different set for everyone else, where you're going to run into some problems is with compression. Because if you've got higher rates for those bargaining units, all of a sudden they're closer to that non-bargaining. So using the same set of comparators for all positions across the city is going to result in better results when it comes to compression and pay equity.
So we've had this discussion before, even dealing with the union, that we have those comparative cities that are mandatory, but we've also made the comment, a lot of times we lose our employees to those cities surrounding us, so we've added them to the list as well.
Right.
So we would have that option as long as it's documented in appropriately, we'd have that option of.
So with non-bargaining, you could make numbers up if you wanted to. You don't have, but using those comparable jurisdictions that you're using for the unions is the safest route to make sure that all of your salary structures are consistent. So with non-bargaining, you're not bound to any particular set.
And while you say we're not bound, but if it's defensible, if we already use something that's already there.
Your salary structure doesn't have to be defensible, or your wage rates don't have to be defensible, because it's non-bargaining. They can't bargain for it. You can say, this is how much we're willing to pay for this position. And then where you'll see that play out is in your recruitment, retention, and hopefully it would be set up as far as, in a way that doesn't have pay equity issues. But you're likely to run into compression problems if you aren't using the competitor or those comparable cities to establish what that schedule is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, for the questions, I got Rob and then Joel. Rob?
So I'm just going to, for the benefit of hopefully everyone, and or people that may be, or just to be on the record, to be as clear as possible. For instance, rather than to be, I'm just going to be literal. This is not going to be English as much as it is just simple arithmetic. So on the sheet that the data that the Vicki Aldis provided, for Public Works Director, for instance, and I'll give the current because it makes it appear as if he may, that position, I should say, should possibly be increased. Currently, Grants Pass tops out at $160,000. Our task force recommendation for that would top it out at $209,000. But going to the other cities, Roseburg tops out at $176,000, K Falls $185,000, Ashland $187,000, Lake Oswego $187,000, Medford $199,000, Corvallis $200,000. So there's a situation, Public Works Director, where our task force recommendation is actually higher. And again, I'm not trying to use any kind of flowery language. That's just arithmetic. It's higher, the task force recommendation. And that's probably because the McGrath study took into account many other cities that were up north, which weighed it differently than just focusing on our basically Southern Oregon look. Now, as far as Community Development Director, currently Grants Pass tops out at $159,000. Our task force recommends a high of $194,000. Roseburg high is $162,000, Ashland $173,000, K Falls $185,000, Lake Oswego $187,000, Medford $193,000, Corvallis $200,000. So again, there's a situation where 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 of the cities fall below what the task force recommendation is. That's just the arithmetic. And I can go down and everybody, all the counselors have this sheet in front of them, and they can easily see what the numbers are. So hopefully, there could be extenuating circumstances. There can be slightly different responsibilities and so forth. And in some of the cities, some of their directors have more responsibility. Some of the cities, Grants Pass has more responsibility. But a finance director is another example. I'm not cherry picking. I could go down the whole list. Currently, our finance director that position tops out at $153,000. Roseburg's tops out at $162,000. Ashland $173,000. K Falls $185,000. Lake Oswego $187,000. Corvallis $191,000. And our task force recommendation is $199,000. So that is actually higher than everyone except Medford. So again, task force across the board on virtually all of these is higher than a majority of the other cities in Southern Oregon, and which again is not surprising because their data was skewed with more, as we heard from Stephanie, their data was skewed with cities from up north, whether it was Tigard, Tualatin, or I can't remember the list, but they were skewed with cities from up north. When we compare it to cities that are in our geographic area that are going to be similar to our housing values, they're going to be more similar to our median wage, then the Courier or the Vicki Aldis's figures are lower than the task force. I think it comes down to whether or not council wants to feel that we want to be competitive with cities all over the state and up north, and we want to compete and try to retain. Again, as I forget, it was Joel who just said, two of the positions that we lost recently were to larger cities up north. Those are people that wanted to basically either make more money or basically move up their their employment ladder by going to larger cities and building their careers and their resumes and so forth. But as far as for cities roughly our size, roughly our demographic, our task force recommendations are higher than the other cities, generally across the board, are higher than the Southern Oregon cities. Council needs to decide where we want to balance it and who we want to have equity with. How much external equity with all cities around the state is important to council or not. Because if it's not ultimately important, I think focusing more on the cities that are closer to our geographic area is what we should be doing.
Further questions ahead? Joel?
Stephanie, I just had an observation I want to check to see if it's true or not. Given the way we determine salary structures and negotiations with union and non-union, it seems like we're going to have pinch points regardless of which alternative we choose in the future, and this is a continuing job.
It's always going to be a continuing job to keep an eye on how those work, so every time we negotiate a
Regardless of
union
what
contract.
alternative we choose.
Correct. There are some alternatives that are better than others
Sure.
long-term, so that where we can have a little bit more breathing room before we need to look at further adjustments.
But it almost seems like it needs to be an annual thing for the pinch points, given where we're at and what we're doing, regardless of the alternative chosen.
I think that what we've talked about doing is every time we're in union negotiations, we take a look at this. That would make the most sense.
Sure.
And see not only when you adjust a union contract, what does that do to the non-bargaining or others as well, just to keep an eye on it and bring it back if there's going to be any kind of a significant
And
pinch point.
be proactive with it and don't just react to it.
And make sure that we're staying on top of the cost of living adjustments and how that'll play in on an annual basis. So try to keep those relatively consistent and do it that way. But we will definitely, from this point forward, there's going to be a number of people with eyes on this on a regular basis to try to stay consistent.
And again, to emphasize, that's regardless of which alternative is chosen.
Correct.
All right, any further questions? Got Seth.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Is that okay?
We are in questions, but this is full discussion, I guess, just go right ahead.
It's a combo.
It's a combo as I was appointed or
Yeah, I
advised
mean,
by my
I was just
attorney.
going to say quickly, I do agree with Rob. I mean, the task force was set out, to look at the consultants' data, and that was what we did. We looked at the consultants' data and came back with that recommendation, although that's just one set of data. And again, the discrepancy is, in all these numbers, we do come out still, even with the consultant or the task force recommendation, pretty much towards the top end. So it's really up to the council, which data we want to move forward with. Again, this is non-bargaining. And so if you have to take into consideration, like Rob said, we live in Southern Oregon, the economics are different, housing prices are different, median income is different. So it's one of those things, if you're going to move up to a city like Portland or Corvallis, you're most likely going to expect, things are going to cost more and you're going to make slightly more money. So.
That sparked a bunch of questions. Awesome. I got, first I saw was Rick, Kathleen, Rob, and then Victoria. So Rick?
Tom, I have a question for you. We're discussing task force recommendation ranges, from one point to another point. And I know we looked at what the current salaries were right now and what they could be, but I don't remember going into any detailed discussion on the range. Can you refresh my memory?
By the range, you mean from step 1 to step 10?
Yes, in the new schedule. Did we actually evaluate those figures, those dollar figures?
Well, when the salary schedule was built around the McGrath data, that 10-step system was built in. So I'm not sure how to answer your question.
Well, we agreed on the 10 steps system.
Right.
But I don't think we sat down and evaluated what the dollar impact would be. In other words, what the dollar amount would be in each 10 steps.
Well, I believe we did.
So we looked at one and said, okay, for the finance director, it's going to be $199,000 for step 10.
Yes.
Okay.
If I'm understanding your question, We looked at the data and how it affected the entire salary schedule.
Correct.
Including every step
Correct.
in that schedule.
And I remember looking at the steps, but I don't remember personally focusing on the dollar, what the top dollar would be. Okay, thank you.
I would, if I may, just comment that when we're recruiting administrative staff for the city of Grants Pass, the market that we're recruiting in is far beyond Southern Oregon. I think we have several people who came to Grants Pass either from out of state or at least outside Southern Oregon. We are competing in a large regional market because the expertise needed for these management positions is not common. There isn't a huge pool of potential chief of police in Southern Oregon. There are good people, there are hardworking, competent people, but to get a qualified applicant pool, the city has to recruit beyond this region. And if the salaries are not competitive, then that has a detrimental impact on the ability to recruit and retain the qualified people that the city needs. We can change the group of comparators, but that really was a determination that was made at the beginning of the process. And if we are to go back and look at a select group of comparators, 7, 8, 9, whatever that number is, that's going to have an impact on the outcome, but it's going to take some careful analysis and deliberation to see if that's really an appropriate way to proceed. I think the task force looked at this from the perspective of the ability of the city to recruit and retain qualified management staff.
Thank you.
Aaron? Go ahead, Aaron.
I just want to add to that. I think the conversation, we've had conversations before with other council members with regards to comparators, and the statements that I'm hearing are spot on from a rational perspective, that we hear that our housing is different, our economics are different than, say, other areas in the state of Oregon. And as the legal counsel said, for non-bargaining, you can choose your comparators. There is nothing that states what comparators you can or cannot choose. You can pick and choose whatever you'd like, and we'll follow through with that, whatever that is. However, with the whole system in place, sort of like Mr. Bradbury was talking about from a recruitment and retention perspective, local versus bargaining unit comparators are really the two things that we've discussed. But if you choose local comparators, it creates a higher risk for being out of market, the creation of compaction, and future pay equity issues. Because you'll likely have the bargaining units increasing their comparability to market at a different rate than the Southern Oregon area, which will create issues that we're dealing with today, much like the non-bargaining getting less each year in a COLA than the bargaining created these same similar issues.
Thank you, Aaron. I had further questions. Kathleen, Rob, Victoria, and then Eric. So Kathleen?
I was just going to make a comment. I don't have
Go ahead.
another question. Go ahead.
If it adds to it, I am
Yeah.
entertaining it.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that we have a retainment level of 39 out of 49 employees, and that we're not defensible. We don't have to be defensible. And seeing how we have a very low average in salary earnings, I'm in favor of letting things play out with the increase in police and fire to see how that's going to go this next year. And I'm going to be in favor of option 3.
Thank you. Further questions? I had Rob, Victoria, and Eric. Rob?
Yeah, I just used a calculator and just, I took 10% off of the task force recommendation in virtually every category. And if you take 10% off the and there may be a more, obviously, is a more scientific way to do it, but I just took 10% off of the task force recommendation in every category, and that puts us essentially right in the middle of the Southern Oregon comparators. So just for, ease of use or discussion, 10% less than the task force recommendations pretty much puts us right in the middle of the Southern Oregon comparators. And I would, just like to comment on Tom's comment about recruitment. We do pull from a large area, and as far as the employees that seem to be happiest and stay the longest, they like it in Southern Oregon once they get here. So the bottom line is, I believe that ultimately, long-term, we're competing against other Southern Oregon. We don't really hear that much about, firemen going from, we heard a lot about it going from Grants Pass to Medford. We didn't really hear about our firefighters going from Grants Pass to Eugene or to Portland or whatever. So we are competitive with Southern Oregon, and that's where I think our focus would be most appropriate. And again, taking 10% off the figures of the task force recommendation puts us right in the middle of the seven comparators that are in front of us.
All right, further questions? I got Victoria and Eric. Victoria?
I seem to remember that early on, we were told as by law, we have to include Lake Oswego because we have to include comparable populations. How would that play into all of this being discussed here now?
That's true for unions. We have to include those competitors. You don't have to for non-bargaining. It just makes sense to use the same comparators for bargaining and non-bargaining.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions I have, Eric?
So I'm going to do discussion, not question.
Go right ahead. If it adds to it, good, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to the task force. We're all volunteers, and I really appreciate the work that you all put into place. It may seem like right now, as we're discussing here, the various things that we have to discuss, we have to make the best decisions that we can. And I just want to make sure that you all know that your work is not going unnoticed. I appreciate it. I'm sure the rest of the council appreciates it as well. What I think, though, is Southern Oregon, because of where we live, I will have to agree with what some of us on the council here were talking about. I wish we could have started off originally with the Southern Oregon portion versus all across the board in Oregon. So that's my discussion. I just wanted to tell you all that we appreciate what you do as volunteers, just like us up here volunteering our time. So I appreciate you.
Thanks. Further questions? Question? Okay, well, let's make sure we answer all questions first. I know we've kind of deviated a little bit, but I believe that, all the discussion so far has been added to this. But let's get any other questions out the door. Okay, go ahead, Indra.
A question to Kathleen, because you mentioned increase in public safety, but then you said option 3, not 4, which is public safety only. So did you mean option 3, or did you, okay.
Okay, any further questions? All right, thank you very much. Stephanie's still here to add to the discussion. The task force is still here to add to the discussion. Now let's bring it back to council for further discussion on this topic, or, come up with some action items to go forward with, to direct staff with. Bring it back to the council. I've got Rick and then Joel. Rick?
So as part of the discussion, Rob, if you do the fire chief and you look at 3 of the cities, Medford, Ashland, Corvallis, Lake Oswego, Roseburg, I came up with the median for those ranges of 195, 172, 175, 174, 157 is the middle for those ranges. And what I hear you expressing concern about is the top level. But when I'm looking at the picture, I'm looking at what we're paying now and what would we be recommended for the current position relating to those cities, not at the maximum. So are you saying we should be taking 10% off the maximum?
So okay, thanks for asking. So I'm not great on my cell phone, and I'm not great doing lots of figures on the fly, so I just took the top figure because I just took a figure. I could take the bottom figure, we could take the median of all those and see what it works out as. The only point I was trying to make is, because it was easy to do quickly, but maybe JC can work it out right here for us, but the top positions, if we took 10% off the top position, the top of the range would be pretty much the average, or right in the middle of those other 7. My guess is, because the ranges are very, very similar, my guess is that if we were to take the average in these different cities and compare it to the average that the task force recommended, if we reduce the task force by 10%, it's probably going to be about the same. Again, that's just looking at the figures, and I just did some arithmetic. If somebody wants to do additional arithmetic, I'm open to it. But I didn't look at the whole range when I did that quickly here on the dais. I didn't look at that, but that was it just stood out, and it was easy for me to read and easy for me to do the math. Someone else wants to do more math right now, I'd love to see it, or I'd love to hear it. I would imagine that it's probably going to be really, really close to the same result.
I don't actually want to do more math, but I would, if you were going to look at doing a reduction of that type, I would say pick which step that's going to be based, the 10% reduction is based on, and then you calculate the other steps in the grid from that point. So if you want to reduce the top of your grid by 10%, you would do the top step and move it down. If you want to do the market average of step 6, you would adjust that one, and then we can calculate from there. You just have to tell us what you want to see.
Since we got a finance guy here who's really good with figures, way better than I, we could look at step 10, we could look at step 6, look at both and just see if it even makes a difference. But I hear what you're saying, but we can look at any step. I just looked at step 10. We could look at step 6, and as that is where the task force didn't put the market average, so that might be a smarter thing to do.
Just as a discussion point, would it be easy to do that if you just took the McGrath study and you said, well, we're just going to do 7 steps, and you do the existing 7 steps where the first 6 or 4%, the last one is 2%, you've got a reduction and you're at 7 steps?
Well, the McGrath study, everyone seems to agree, including the task force, and the McGrath study was actually way too high. They're actually, I don't think that anyone was ever considering using McGrath. The task force came down probably 10% below McGrath. I also think that the task force felt that a 10-step was ultimately better, and they also felt that the last 3 steps being 2% jumps rather than 4% jumps was the way to go. So what you're considering, Aaron, is about 3 or 4 different aspects of that have already kind of been, we've kind of gone away from that concept. So I would avoid the consultant's recommendation because it's already been deemed to be really not applicable.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comment on that, Councilor Pell, but I misstated McGrath because they ultimately did a modified version of McGrath. If you took the task force's recommendation number 1, and you took the step 7 through 10 off, or for the last 3, then you'd get your reduction that you're sort of talking about, but you would still have a basis from the study that we received and the information that was provided.
Well, I know, Aaron, that you at a prior meeting expressed a preference for a 7-step program, but I don't know that the task force did, and I don't necessarily. And actually, it was just a few years ago when you basically sold everybody on the idea of a 10-step program. We went from 7 to 10 based on presentations that were done about 4 years ago, and now it seems as though 10 is what the task force deemed best. And I would go with that.
Yeah, well, I was just providing that as an option for discussion. I'm not trying to push one thing or another, Counselor.
Okay, so before we go further discussion, I would say, just to clarify what has conspired so far, is you have a task force that is recommending option 1 as presented by Stephanie. You also have multiple counselors, as well as Rob spearheading this, to actually get these numbers down to, clarify me if I'm wrong, Rob, in kind of the medium range within all of these Southern Oregon cities rather than the initial study, which does make sense. So that's kind of the direction I'm seeing council pushing. I'm not stopping anybody's conversation. I'm just kind of clarifying so we can move forward and kind of stay on task. So what I've gotten so far of the discussions and questioning is that majority of council feels that maybe the task force recommendations of option 1 is a viable option, and then there's a lot of sentiment from councilors that we would like to actually push the low-end range, price range, and high-end price range down to the median level of all the Southern Oregon cities that have been presented for it. That's just clarification points, so we'll go back into further discussion. And I had Joel and then Rick, so Joel.
Well, taking the task force's work and then looking at it as 90% to start with, that doesn't mean next year you can't go to 95 or in the year after that to 100 if it warrants it. The one nice thing about it, 90%, everybody gets a pay raise. And so it's a lot better than what it is under the existing condition, and in many cases it's significant. And so as we go through there, I think it makes sense, and I don't know why we wouldn't do it.
Okay, further discussion, I have Rick.
I'm a little bit concerned we're not talking apples and oranges. And what is bothering me is that the task force recommended going from the 7-step to the 10-step because it helps retention. And if somebody's looking at moving here and they move in because of their background and experience at a higher level, if they don't see there's the opportunity to grow financially, they may not wish to come. So that's just, I feel that was a perspective we tried to focus on. But I think, to me, the litmus test is, what are we paying now? I mean, if you have everybody at step 1, the cost of the city is totally different, no matter what the grid shows. The grid can have 10 allocations there, but if everybody's at step 1, the city's getting by inexpensively. So I tend to focus on, what are we paying the person now? What do we have to pay them to retain them and meet the challenges that we have? But that's just a perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Any further discussion? Indra?
Yes, I too think the McGrath study recommendations were ridiculously high, and I appreciate the task force and all the work that you all did. It was really helpful, whether we go with that or not. It really helped. I just look at where we live, and we had someone wrote in, and I'm sure the figures are accurate, but we have a 6.5% unemployment rate. Our poverty rate is 15.52. Public assistance, 20 to 25% of people are on public assistance in Josephine County. We have a Medicaid enrollment of 29%. There is a huge income divide, the haves and the have-nots, and that's growing. Over the 30 years I've been here, that is really growing. And where are the haves? The government employees are the haves. And so I go in there looking like these are, to me, really great salaries, really great already. And they get COLA. Don't forget, it's not just the step. There's 3% COLA every year, no matter what, or close to it, 2.7. So that's in addition to the steps. And so what Joel mentioned is we're going to have to look at compression regardless because it depends on the union. So going forward, we have to look every year and keep our eye on, which we didn't for the last 15 years, of compression and what's happening. And we will have to make slight adjustments going forward for that because we do want to reduce our liability. But at what point do we say we're not going to tax the citizens more who are making $40,000, and that's good for a lot of them here, so that someone can get 200 or 150 or 90 or even 80. So that's kind of my position. I'm looking, why do we have to be even in the median of Southern Oregon? Why can't we be more at the lower end? So, 10%, I would look at that. I would look at doing the minimum now, which, maybe is the regrade or finish taking care of those positions where we had the compression issues and problems. And then just doing more slowly going forward as things arise. The reason I want to see the turnover retention rate is I'm not so sure. It seems like we have a lot of long-term, very long-term employees because not only do they love living here, they came in at the salary, they stayed, on the salary. We want them to stay. They're great employees and we love them. But there's also a lot of perks to living and working in Grants Pass. And a lot of, in my experience, national or people that come from different places, especially bigger cities, are very transient. So they'll come in and say, Grants Pass isn't really the place for me, and they'll leave. So I believe recruiting locally and training is the best retention for our city. So I disagree a little about that. So I'm looking at doing the least amount. And then on a different topic, and I don't know if this is the time, I'm wondering about the city manager. And because the city manager is our employee and has kind of a totally different position than any of these other positions, should the city manager be separated even from this group when we talk about salaries? Because the city manager has his own contract.
I don't think that's a topic at hand right now, so if we can keep to the topic. I mean, we're trying to deal with the salary structure here. I understand that it's probably something for a different conversation, but if we can kind of keep on task, because we are kind of going in circles on this. You guys kind of need to come to some kind of consensus of a forward movement.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I might chime in on the, I did a quick run of numbers of the task force grid at less 10% at step 6, so that market average reduction. If I do that where employees would end up placed, we would have 5 employees placed at step 10 that would result in pay cuts ranging from 1% to 9%. So there are 5 employees that could not properly be placed on that salary schedule.
Thank you for the added information. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not trying to cut you off, but just if we could keep it focused more to the salary structures. I don't think it's prudent to take the topic of taking an employee out at this point in time. Go ahead.
Well, this is the salary structure. It's on there.
We're talking about the structure of the whole system. We're not necessarily talking about individual positions being taken out right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just trying to stay on task here because this is a long, drawn-out subject that we want to kind of come to a conclusion here pretty soon. Joel, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to respond to our lawyer. So there would be if you put those placements at 90%, you said some people would take a pay cut?
Yes, there's no, the top of the grid.
They don't take a pay cut.
Right.
They stay the same.
Then we can't adjust their salary schedule because what it does is it reduces the top of the schedule.
We don't do an adverse action against them. Their pay stays the same.
We would have to, what I'm saying is we can't adjust the schedule in that way unless we were willing to make it a pay cut for step 10. So it's not possible.
We wouldn't make a pay cut for those existing employees. It would stay the same.
Then we can't adjust the schedule. we cannot adjust that band which then puts things out of whack.
Legally, you cannot cut their pay.
Correct.
And so we would not cut their pay. We could adjust the schedule, but they'd still get the same pay regardless of what the schedule said.
They'd be frozen,
They
in
wouldn't,
essence.
there is no step on there that
Right.
could make that amount of money that
That's
they're
true.
currently making. That's the problem, is that.
But they'd still make that
step
amount of money. They
10,
wouldn't get their pay cut.
then we wouldn't be adjusting that band. Because then they wouldn't be
We
paid pursuant to our
could adjust that
schedule.
band, they wouldn't get their pay cut.
Okay, did we come to an answer resolution on that? Okay,
I think we're going to agree to disagree on that one.
okay, sounds good. Further discussion and/or some action going forward here?
So,
Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry, Rob and then
it's
Rick.
okay. So I guess, Joel, what you were saying is that, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Or as you would say, let me repeat back what I think I heard you say. So, there is, if we were to do a 10% lower than the task force recommendation, it would not be a fatal flaw. It would be something that would be adjusted or not adjusted. They wouldn't they wouldn't get a pay cut. When another person with that job, years from now moves up the line, they would then start at step 1 and they'd be able to go to step 10. But you're saying you don't believe it's a fatal flaw, it's just not perfect. We've already heard today that no situation is going to be perfect here, that there's going to have to be, there's redlining in some situations, there's other situations where people jump to, nothing is going to be perfect, but it's not a fatal flaw is what I'm hearing you say.
So Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but those positions right now are above the median compared with Southern Oregon. And so if you did what we did and you would place them on that position, it would bring them back down to be comparable with their peers in Southern Oregon, because right now they're above it.
I
But
think
we don't do that. They would stay at the higher level.
So you're talking about paying people outside of the actual salary structure. I don't believe city policy allows for that. We'd have to change.
Their wages would be frozen, that's done all the time. And so they would not lose any money. But there are employees right now that are in a position, and there's not very many of them, and bless their hearts, they probably do a great job and we need to value them, but they're making above the median of Southern Oregon.
So I have a question. So Stephanie, are those are employees that are already at the top of their range, right?
Let's see. One is a step 7,
On the 7-step grid or a 10-step grid?
10-step grid. One is a step 7.
Okay.
8, 8, and 10. So between 7 and 10 is where they're currently at. Where you're running, those are some of the positions that would have basically a smaller grid shift. So when because the grid shift is so small for that position, if you reduce the new grid, you're reducing the new grid back less than what your current grid is.
So anyone who's currently on a step 10 or step 7 in a 7-step grid, without any of these changes, they're also frozen. They can't move up.
They are. What I'm
So we
saying
have a bunch
is
of those already.
there are
that can't move up.
positions where if you reduce the schedule by 10%, the
Right.
task force schedule,
Right.
it makes the new schedule less than what the current schedule has them at for a range.
Right.
And that's where we run into some problems with certain positions.
Right. So
So we can leave those bands as they are, which would make the most sense. But then it throws off the entire structure because the different bands are built on each other.
So just to be clear, I'm hoping that JC or someone on the council checks my math, because I'm not going to take responsibility for the entire city's arithmetic skills, okay? So somebody's going to check my math, and obviously we've got Stephanie or someone else who's got to have to make whatever relatively minor adjustments there might be to a few positions to make this work. I'm not suggesting that I'm an HR expert or a mathematician. I'm just throwing out what I consider to be a very close approximation of what could work.
Yep.
And obviously it's going to need some tweaking.
I'm
I'm not saying it's perfect,
if you're looking at doing something like that to try to get to a Southern Oregon median as opposed to the statewide that we've been looking at, I would suggest that we take the time to look at all the positions themselves to find out what that is, because you're making decisions based on data related to only the executive team, which, as you note from the data provided, the grid shift for those higher level positions is significantly higher than some of the other positions. So you would essentially be penalizing some of the positions that are a little closer to market by reducing them by quite as much. So we'd want to, if you're going to do that, take a look at the same comparables for all positions and not just a handful and make decisions on that.
So you would have to do a full-blown market
Well,
analysis on that?
Yes and
those
no.
southern-
I mean, arguably, that would be the safest. We could take Dr. McGrath's data. We do have the raw data that provides the step 1, step 6, step 10 for all of our comparators. You tell me which comparators to use and not use, and we could just use that data from those comparators to figure those out. That would be a more streamlined version of it. So it is a possibility to do it that way.
Okay, thank you for the information. Further discussion? I got Rick?
So I'm having difficulty with the discussion because when I look at the whole picture here, I don't focus on the grid and I don't focus on the range on the grid, but I focus what the actual cost is for the employee. I mean, if every employee in the city was at step 1, we'd have a very affordable situation. But because everybody's scattered all over the grid and some people are not in their proper position, I want to focus on where they're at now, where they would be in the future, and what is that total impact to the city for the future. So that's part of the perspective I'm trying to sort through. Thank you.
Any further discussion? So we are currently at the same position we are in as we walked in this door today. So I would advise you to come up with a path forward. Again, my synopsis on listening to this work session so far is that there is favoritism towards taking the recommendation of the task force, option 1, but there is also question about the actual raw data and comparison, and it would be more favorable to bring the comparison data more towards a Southern Oregon style town, maybe utilizing some of the data that was presented to us from Vicki at the Daily Courier in an email. That's just another clarification and synopsis of what I've seen today. Rob?
Yeah, I'm gonna make a motion. But first, I would also like to say that I don't want to assume that Vicki Aldis's figures are correct. I believe that they are, but I'm not gonna, we're not gonna move forward based on that. I want to see verification by staff that these figures are reasonable and correct for Southern Oregon. And then beyond that, I'd like to make a motion that staff comes back with what the entire picture looks like at doing the grid at 10% less than the task force recommendation. And that's the motion that I'll make, that staff brings that back, and then we can have another discussion, and anybody else who wants to see or wants to at that time look at option 3 or any other option, we can compare that. But I'd like to see an option, staff bring forward an option that is 10% less than the task force recommendation, and that's the motion that I'm going to make.
So just to clarify your motion, Rob, you're not actually picking an option presented today. You're basically asking for another option with a reduction in the salary or the values that you had stated.
Yeah.
Okay.
An option that is 10% less than the task force recommendation.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for the clarification. So,
And just to clarify, I would expect, unless told otherwise, I would expect to do that at a 10% reduction from step 6, which is considered the market average, and then going 2% and 4% from there. Would that be correct?
if you think that makes the most sense, I wouldn't mind seeing step 6 and step 10. But
Okay.
if step 6 is going to make this more workable or easier to understand, that's fine with me.
Okay, so Rob's motion is taking the task force recommendation, option 1, reduction of 10%. As first stated by Stephanie there, would be looking for a second. Joel, got a second? Okay.
So we're basically asking for more information.
Asking for more information, yeah. And I think what it does is brings it back to the census of what I got from the whole discussion today is kind of bringing these evaluations down to a more Southern Oregon pinpoint basis.
Well,
Okay.
and also looking at the details like Stephanie talked about.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to bring forth another option, 10% less of task force's recommendation with a second. Any further discussion? All right, so you will be voting yes to direct staff to bring back another option for your consideration at a future date. Roll call, Rob.
Yes?
Seth.
Yes.
Yes.
Indra.
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
Kathleen.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Victoria.
Yes.
Joel.
Yes.
Okay, staff, do you have direction?
I do.
Clear?
We'll return soon.
Thank you very much. All right,
So,
go ahead.
Clint?
Yep,
We can discuss,
yep, I was
we
going
can
to bring that up.
discuss Indra's point now.
Yep.
Because it also,
Yeah, I was going to bring up some clarification
Okay, thank
because
you.
I just
Okay.
felt that as for taking a certain employee out, it kind of was, it was parallel, but not. Okay, so Indra, if you want to bring back to full discussion, if you want to clarify more of what you were trying to get at.
Yes, I just wanted to say the city manager is, to me, a very standalone position with his own contract that the council approves, and I don't think should be meshed in with the entire city and their steps
So
and
do you
all
have
that.
actual
So
recommendation?
I would like to,
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
going. I would like to recommend we pull the city manager out of the list of what we're doing with the steps and all that.
Okay, so I heard your request, but I believe there's going to be further clarification that needs to be done because just taking somebody out of a current system, that just seems we're floating it. So is there a further recommendation? If you're taking them out of the current structure, do you have a recommendation of what to do with that person? That position, sorry.
Well,
Or is it just something that you want to discuss and then further come up with something?
yes, I think we could discuss it, and that, I mean, I'm not saying that position should not have steps or be stuck or not get raises, so I think we would discuss how that goes.
So let me clarify if, correct me if I take any of this wrong. So you would like the council to proceed with discussions on taking out the city manager's position out of the current structure and maybe doing something different. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Well, the something different, I believe, and I'm not a contractual expert, but, you know, maybe that would be something that would be in the contract for the city manager is how his pay goes. But
Okay.
separate, yeah.
So with all counselors been able to hear what the discussion between me and Indra have been and in Indra's desire to have a further discussion, does council feel that this could be a discussion to be had at a further, at a future workshop? We won't be able to discuss it now because I believe this is going to be outside the purview of what we announced for this workshop, so we don't have enough notice. Rob?
yeah, I'd definitely like to discuss it. I think that, as Stephanie said today, that all the different bargaining groups and non-bargaining groups, everything is interrelated. And as a result, literally, we, the council and the people, as an extension, we don't have a single truly unbiased employee that's working with the council on any salary issue, on any bargaining issue. And The manager being our only employee, I feel should be, on these salary issues, should be essentially working for the council and should be able to be unbiased. This would remove any bias that the manager would have in any salary discussion because he wouldn't be a member of any group. And so I would definitely agree that that's a discussion that needs to be had.
Any further discussion? So I'd like to get the sentiment of council if you'd like to proceed forward with a future workshop in discussing this matter. Thumbs up, please. Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Do that one more time. I got 1, 2, 3, 4.
Got 5.
Oh. I got Joel, I got Indra, I got Seth, I got Rob, I got Kathleen. Okay, so we're over.
You also got Rick.
No, Rick was doing this. He wasn't even putting his thumb up in there. I got eyes, buddy. My glasses, they're not that dirty.
I'm not here to do your job.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and put this on the back of the agenda and to be put on a further future workshop. All right, there's nothing else on the agenda tonight, or today, so I would say.
That could be at the next discussion with this paper. That could be part of the next discussion.
We'll put that on the agenda setting. Yeah. Okay. Nothing else, so we are adjourned workshop today. Thank you very much.